I think that you can't change which one you are, but you can't change if you prefer to lead or manage. But you can know which way is most effective to accomplish the idea. So I'm not a manager. I'm a leader. But I do know that if it's a new idea, a new paradigm, innovative in its approach, that the process of innovation, most people haven't set with the idea as long as I've set with the idea. So if you haven't set with the idea as long as I've set with the idea, just because I have a meeting or a conversation with you, don't necessarily mean that you got it. You might get it because you buy into it or you believe in it, or maybe you still got questions about it, but you haven't set with the idea as long as I have. So I know as much as I want to lead you through innovation to the big picture of the idea, I know that a little bit of management is going to be necessary in that approach before I can trust the delegation. Right. Other than that, if I hurry up and revert back to my natural style, you're also gonna revert back to your natural style. And if your natural style is not task orientated, then you just like think it's gonna all come together. That's gonna create, by the time I come back to check on to see if you feel supported, I'm gonna realize that not only don't you feel supported, you don't have a clue, or you halfway into doing it wrong. Right. And we could declare, like, where did that happen? Right. Because I just walked away, like, I led that, and then when I finished leading it, they really still needed to be managed.
That's great. That's what I was after.
Yeah. And I think that I've learned that lesson too many times. The first hard part was just discovering that, hey, I'm not a manager, I'm a leader. Right. Management drains me. Leadership gives me strength. But then if you don't take time to develop the people around you that you lead, then you can't lead. You're gonna have to manage, because you can't just give away to places and people that you haven't developed or that haven't developed themselves as leaders. So that's where we get stumped. That's one of the longest distances between idea and implementation. Well, what happened between idea and implementation? Like, we started off, everybody was on fire, it was good. But in between idea and implementation is these layers of leadership reinforcement that has to happen in order for the idea to be executed well and for everybody to stay in their original or most organic form of who they are. Right. And it's a learned behavior, because that's why I always say leaders aren't born, they're made. Right. Leadership is a learned behavior. But if you don't study your style, other people's style of leadership, you don't grow into you don't know what to do with leadership lessons. So you're like, man, what's a leadership lesson that I can learn out of why this happened well or didn't happen well? And sometimes you'll fool yourself, because sometimes you'll gather a great team full of leaders and you'll do nothing and they'll hit it off and you'll walk away. You'll give them the credit for doing it, but you'll be like, man, we killed that. You really didn't. You just had to write a good group of people. Sometimes the challenge is, can you take a not so mature group of people and still accomplish a task with excellence, not because you felt like you did it in your most favorable style, but because you recognize the dynamics of the team and help them embrace an idea in a different style.
That's good.
Yeah, that's a challenge.
So do you feel like people come to the table, as far as the people you're leading? Do they come to the table with their own standard, and then you have to like calibrate them as far as what the expectation is for the standard? Or do you feel like they take their raw material and then what they produce is based on their standard of excellence?
Wow, that's a great question. I think that it depends on if you picked your team and cultivated your team. Nope, I think even if you pick your team and cultivate your team, or if your team came from somewhere else and you inherited that team, I think either way, excellence is an expectation. And so excellence and prescribed excellence has to be cleared up in the culture of what you're building. Like, this is excellence. Because you can't just say, oh, let's do it in excellence, because that means something to everybody. Exactly. So doing it in excellence among our team means we start on time. We end on time. We are dressed appropriately. We blah blah blah. So you might have to prescribe what the 5 things of what excellence looks like on this team in culture. So if you did it, it's not just getting it done. Whew, excellence. No. Excellence looks like this among our team, and then that's shaped in the culture. And then once you identify and communicate that properly in the culture of your team, then you set that expectation. Then you can start challenge people to live to that expectation, so that you don't just go from idea to implementation and then just do it mediocre. So that's a whole nother conversation between standards of mediocrity and excellence, and what's the difference between the two. So people get frustrated, or they rise and fall in a particular area of success based on how they implement an idea, not if they have a good idea.
Right.
So if you have a good idea and don't implement it well, somebody with better implementation will take your idea and do it better than you did it. Yeah. And you'll be sitting back talking about, that was my idea, but your implementation was horrible. Yeah.
The gap.
That's right. Boom. Yeah. Great question.
That's exciting. I think I asked the question about excellence because I'm reading this book called Pursuit of Excellence. And it's talking about how excellence is a God quality. And I think people miss that because, to your example, when you're saying it's shaped into culture, if you are coming from a culture or you led in a culture where the standard is low and it's not a spiritual environment or somewhere where God is the standard of excellence, then your productivity or your implementation is kind of skewed because it's not set on the ultimate standard. And I asked that just translating it from a secular work culture to a spiritual work culture, there's a breakdown in maybe people's understanding, even if it is prescribed. Because even if it is the culture, if your personal standard hasn't been adapted to the standard of the culture, it gets messed up.
Totally. Yeah. Because it means something different to everybody. Like that, words matter, but although words have a definition, most people define words through their own experiences, which can be like great or not great, but no matter where you apply, for instance, excellence, you still apply it or measure it by this standard. If you call it God or you call it perfection.
Right. Exactly.
If you call it, no flaws or flawless, or if you call it the Spirit of God, either way, you're talking about the same quantity of a perfected idea or ideology that you're hoping to execute in a certain way. But I think people spend too much time trying to be perfect in execution as opposed to trying to make sure that they process the idea in excellence, right? So it's like you're gonna mess up, but messing up or making mistakes is a part of the process.
Right.
If you do it well, everything was clearly spelled out, and you learned something that you didn't know, that doesn't mean it wasn't excellent. That just means that just means it didn't succeed to the outcomes that you wanted, but it doesn't change your quality or your standard. We was here on time, we was dressed appropriately, we did right, and then you try to find what you missed, but it's not always that.
Right.
Yeah, but I think that in planning is the way that we control time and change. So planning is the way that we control time and change. We don't spend enough time communicating a plan and delegating the plan so that you can control the outcomes of time and change.
Right.
And when we do it the way we do it. So we say, I told them. But telling somebody is not teaching them. And sometimes we think we told someone something that we should have taught them before we told them, so that they can't say they didn't know what we meant.
Right.
Just because we told them, we didn't teach them. That's leadership and management. I think the hardest thing. Yeah. I think the biggest challenge with me is that I've learned I don't like giving away tasks, but some people need a task to work. So I need a person in between me and the task person sometimes to let them have a task. Or when I'm developing somebody leadership, then I know they need a task. They don't need a task because they're not an effective leader.
Right.
They just need a checklist because they might be doing a lot of stuff or want to be engaged in what they're doing, so they don't want to think about what's next.
Right.
So when I'm dealing with that kind of person, then I'll give you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Not because I think something bad, just so you don't have to think about the next thing. You can just give yourself to that and then go to the next thing. Give yourself to that, go to the next. Check, 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 check. But if I'm surrounded by people that think in tasks, that just takes me out because now I got to task everybody. Somebody got to know what to do next.